Hello, it claims I'm live, and I thought I'd start a couple of minutes early because this is a new platform. If anybody's in chat, please say something. Am I live? It says live in the top left-hand corner, and my microphone's picking up, but I can't see anything in chat. Oh, hello, it's working. Brilliant. So this is not gin. I don't know what it is. I found a bottle lying around the house, but I thought I'd experiment with drinking it live on stream. I mean, I think it's safe for human consumption. It smells vaguely chocolatey. Cocoa. I think it's cocoa beans in there. Oh my God, you can see all my wrinkles in that case, Musa. I'm older than I might seem. Not long, sadly. Right, it's 4 o'clock, so I can start talking. Confirm you can hear me, please, folks, because it's entirely possible I'll be talking to what I think is a live mic for 5 minutes, and then it'll be terribly wrong. Hey, okay. So, welcome to the first ever Solo with the Factory Design live stream. Claire, Mark, and Lottie are all watching from a distance, but Lottie's still on her train on the way back from somewhere. So I'm completely free to say things like all the Weather Factory games will now be going free to play, supported by microtransactions, and in fact we're partnering with Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. But that's not true, to be clear. I invented that, I made that up because I'm a writer. I do actually seriously want to talk briefly about what's going on here, because we've been, I think, slightly more enigmatic than usual for a couple of reasons. One is that we've just had a really busy couple of months, which are coming down from, but only as we go into a bunch of announcements at the end of this month, which you should be hearing any moment soon. So in case you missed it, Weather Factory is now 4 people. We have posted about this, but it's something. I know I've been slightly less communicative. Well, it's me, it's Lottie, it's Claire, who's handling marketing PR, and it's Mark, aka Nairo, from the Discord, who has been doing an absolutely fucking sterling job sorting out our systems and fixing bugs I don't have time for, and is going to be involved in a secret upcoming project, as well as a less secret upcoming project that we're very nearly ready to announce. We've got one person joining us next month as well. And so that means Weather Factory will be 5 people. And it's a little bit of a change of pace, because for a long time it was just me and Lottie in the flat. And then even if it was me and Lottie and Claire, it's still a very small operation. And now we're actually a team. But we're going to keep trying to talk to you as if you and we are humans. And I want to stay in touch with the community, because without you, we're nothing. So, what are we going to talk about today? Priest and Ghoul. These are the 2 last bits of DLC for Cultist for the time being. So the final thing I should mention is, as most of you are aware, we are winding down development of Cultist Simulator after the end of May. We'll still be definitely fixing bugs and supporting it. We may well produce more content for it, but our focus will shift to the unannounced project, which is almost certainly that damn library game, and a second unannounced secret project. I fucking love Cultist. I'm ready for a break, though, So I'm really keen to move away, but I want to keep working in the same universe. Everything that we're talking about is about making a set in the cultist universe at the moment, which I'm calling the histories. And it's very possible return in the future. I would expect somebody will ask me at some point during this chat whether there is ever going to be an Edge or a Secret Histories Ascension. And the answer is, as it usually is, I'd like there to be, but I can't guarantee anything. Certainly there won't be before the end of May. So, priest and ghoul. Priests do Nock Ascensions, ghouls do Winter Ascensions. And when I first started writing the two, I thought ghoul was going to be much the nastier of them, especially because it does contain explicit anthropophagy, which is to say the consumption of human flesh, as well as a number of other unwise substances. And this has, I know, been a theme in my work in the past, but ghoul is Winter Ascension, priest is Nock Ascension. So I thought ghoul was going to be a lot nastier. And it's not really turned out that way. I'm going to talk about why and the way that I tried to deal with the themes in the two legacies and the way that that it turned out. As a priest in Cultist Simulator, you are the recently arrived officiant at a heterodox church, very like the church that you can break into and murder everybody, in fact, in an early expedition. And the important thing about the priest is that he doesn't start, or she doesn't start, with a desire of her own. Brief sidebar, I've gone to some lengths not to be clear whether there are female priests in history that we're in. That's made much easier, of course, by there not being an explicit choice of gender in cultist, which is itself a choice. But I wanted to keep it ambiguous. And as I think is apparent to anybody who's read enough of the books in the backstory, in at least one version of the histories, there was a Church of the Unconquered Sun that was roughly Christian or Mithraic, and which allowed female priests who had in some literal, physical, metaphysical sense transitioned to male. And there was a Sisterhood of the Knot, which was the church's opposite number. And there are some connections between some of those texts and some of the things you'll see in the Priest Legacy. But out of the sidebar, the priest is a character who's arrived at the church where the congregation has unusual beliefs. And the most important thing about the priest is that they're not really managing an ascension of their own. They are the tool of their people's, their congregation's desires, and they are providing a way for their people. So they literally don't have a desire at the beginning of the game. And there's a sidebar on that a few of you are aware of. I'll come back to that. And because the principle is Nock, it's quite a receptive principle in lots of ways. The priest is the door that's open, and not the one that opens the door. And one of the things that came to mind, of course, when I started looking into this is the tradition of martyrdom in Christianity and its allied concepts. And the priest is in many respects a holy martyr for Saint Agnes, who is a incarnation of a very particular power in the Cultist Simulator universe that you folks will recognise quite quickly. So the priest undergoes rather than pursuing, and that means a slightly different emphasis, because the traditional Cultist Simulator experience is very much about having this overriding desire to do something and enacting your will on the universe. And the priest is about having been chosen and having things done to them. So, spoilers, turn your sound off now if you don't want to hear what happens to the priest. But you need to undergo 7 trials, which scar you in 7 ways. And when those scars are then opened, then you can fulfill your purpose for your congregation. Which, for those who like that sort of thing, that is the sort of thing they like. Now, writing this is spectacularly icky. Some of the Knock principle law is already pretty grim because it tends to be about holy wounds and openings and fistulae and those sort of things. And honestly, I found it a bit grisly. I've been writing Cultist for basically 2 years now, on and off, and some of it is easily the most grotesque stuff I've ever written, which in 10-year career is quite a stiff point of comparison. And I'm really looking forward to moving on to something a little bit gentler. But the priest then is someone who chooses what they're subjected to, and there's a couple of points about that I want to talk about in design terms. So the first is that their congregation are everything. The priest is much more about the general sort of extras, the faceless crowd who don't have name parts than other cultists. That gives them a couple of unusual mechanical advantages. They can temporarily raise up cultists from the congregation when the congregation is particularly enthused. So you get effectively sort of unpaid hirelings that work like cultists. And they can, they benefit when they preach particularly effectively their congregation, and they also gain more risks when they preach their congregation. So the more powerful the preaching, the deeper the law they use, the more funds they're likely to get, and the more likely they are to produce fervour, which is a special card the priest can get. There's a couple of additional uses. But also, the more likely they are to produce mystique and notoriety and attract the attention of the suppression bureau. So there's a balancing act there. The other thing the priest can do is rededicate their cult. I mentioned earlier that the priest is very much a tool of their congregation's will. And the priest is the first legacy who doesn't create their own cult. Rather, they arrive and find that it's waiting for them. It's been set up by the previous player character, the previous legacy. So you'll take over their cult. Although in a fairly tenuous cultist simulated way, you don't get all the cultists and all the goodies and everything. So that I thought was a really powerful way of showing that the priest is in their own way a pawn. But this takes us to the second point, which is that as a designer, very often you start out with a thematically intended experience, and that experience isn't necessarily something that works for players. I was talking over Ludonarracon to Will O'Neill in the panel we did on Death and Games, and Will's thing is to, one of his things anyway, is to take away agency from the player, which artistically is very interesting, but it works much better in short, explicitly depressing art games than it does in strategy or puzzle games or games which are a bit more roleplay like Cultist Simulator. By the way, I think I'm running on, it looks like about a 10-minute delay on chat. So if you ask me questions right now, I'm not seeing them. I'm just seeing a whole bunch of people come in and say hello. So I don't seem to be answering you. That's why, but I wouldn't have time to any while I'm talking, and I'll catch up at the end. Okay, so priest. I wanted the priest to be a passive, receptive a character thematically in lots of ways. I wanted the priest to be the tool of its congregation. But if a player is enacting their will on a board, and if they're used to it being a fantasy of dark power, in lots of other contexts, it can be very unsatisfying for them just to have to enact other people's thing. And we gave out a few keys as part of the competition for priests to get some early feedback. And this is one of the things that came back in the feedback, is that people don't always love being told what they need to do and having no choice but to do it. And this, so I was already thinking about this. I was thinking about needing to foreground the fact that you're a tool rather than an actor in some respects, and to give people a bit more choice. And then early in the feedback and in the feedback channel on the Discord, we saw a very specific problem that I completely overlooked, which is simply that because the priest doesn't have a desire of their own, which is intentional, they can't pass the stag door, which is not intentional. We had a similar problem, I think, with the apostles when I forgot to put a desire in strictly for them. And there was no way past the stag door through them, which made priest ascension much more difficult than I intended. So now, and again, spoilers, look away, or mute your mics, your speakers if you're not interested in hearing priest spoilers. The solution I added today is this. As a priest, you can rededicate your cult, because I wanted people to be able to choose what cult they have if they inherit one that they hate from the previous legacy. So that was always in the plan, that you'd be able to rededicate your cult, and that was a special priest ability. And yes, that does mean you can get 2 different sets of exalts. Now, if you rededicate your cult, then you get a temptation, power, enlightenment, or sensation appropriate to that cult appearing. You rededicate your cult to Grail, even if it's already started as Grail, you get sensation. If you rededicate it to Nok, you get enlightenment. And you can ignore that temptation, or you can give it up. There's actually a way to purge yourself of the temptation entirely in the game. Or you can actually pursue it. So right up until the point that you complete a Nok ascension, you could, if you so chose, change your mind and move to one of the other ascensions and become a traditional Lantern Long or Grail Long or Forge Long. So this gets me out of a mechanical hole, because you now can get the desire that allows you to pass the stag door. And it also, well, I just thought of something, which I'll write down. But it also fills a couple of thematic holes. And as a designer with limited time, and all designers have limited time, you always want to kill as many birds with each stone you throw as possible. It also means there's a mildly interesting strategic wrinkle, because you have to decide how soon you're going to rededicate your cult. So you won't be able to get through the stag door until after you do that. Although in practice, because Cultist Simulator does over-reward caution, I think it just means most people are going to hang around longer before they cross the line. So that's priest desire, and that's what's going to that was the solution I added to make it possible to pass the stag door, and how I tried to blend it back into themes. And I said earlier that often, if you intend something as a designer, it's not enough that you intend it. If the point of your game is that the player feels as if they're submerged in a sewer up to their ears with human turds floating past at eye level, and you manage to create that experience, then wonderful, well done on doing an art. But I think it's legitimate for a player to say, I'm not into this whole turd floating experience. And especially if you promise me a heroic fantasy RPG, then the turd floating experience is of limited interest to me. So to scale that way back, if I say the whole point of the priest is that you don't really have a choice, a player can then legitimately object that experience, and I want to provide at least the form of a choice, at least the role-playing context of a choice. And this, I think, often applies with mechanical effects that are intended to create a thematic or creative or emotional have thematic or creative or emotional meaning. And that's kind of my speciality, is to try to find mechanical effects that have fictional or creative or poetic outcomes. But the thing about this is, if somebody doesn't realize the effect it's trying to have, they don't experience that effect, even if unconsciously, it's wasted. So here's an example of that. It's a very straightforward way of addressing it. Several people in feedback said, if you preach using passion, it takes 50 seconds. And if you preach using reason, it takes 60 seconds. And is that a typo? I have put typos in my work in the past, as many of you will know, so that was not an unreasonable assumption. It was intentional, because if you're preaching with passion, you're probably talking more quickly. And more to the point, you're improvising. I think it said explicitly in the text that you're improvising. But that wasn't what players were experiencing. They didn't think I'm improvising. So there's a very small strategic choice between using passion and getting your fun slightly quicker. They just thought it was a typo. And however clever your design, if it's not apparent to people that it's intentional, then often that's a problem. So all I did was go in and put in small square bracket text that said, this context is, this action using passion is quicker because you're improvising rather than planning out your sermon in detail. But I think that's important to recognize, is if you're designing a game or a lot of other pieces of art, if something looks like a mistake, the whole good intention and the outcome of what you intend may be lost. Cult Desire 56 versus 66. Right. Okay, looks like the chat is about 5 minutes behind. So I'll answer some quick priest questions for that. You're welcome on the turds. My daughter would be telling me off if she's in the room for going there. I see Mr. Kotsonis in there. Thank you, Mr. Kotsonis, for catching the bug with the law-specific preaching not showing up. Because one of the mechanics in Priest is that if you choose an ability that matches the law you're preaching with, so you choose passion and grail, for example, that's much more effective. Some of those specific texts weren't turning up. I think Mr. Kotsonis there noticed it because he'd been poking around the JSON. And actually, there was an obscure bug that meant certain kinds of linkage weren't working with link rather than alternative recipes. So that's now fixed. I'm glad we caught it. Priests can still do Glover and Glover retirement, absolutely. And they can they've got access to all the normal exits from the game. And I think this is what Tim was going to say earlier. Often with choices in games, you cannot, even in a text-based game that's deliberately wide open, satisfy all the possible choices. Often, just indicating to the player that you've acknowledged the possibility of a choice, even if all they get is a non-standard game over, then that's enough, having the road not taken, to provide the sense that the designer respects them. My compatriots in nerdy feedback would like to point out they caught that bug too. Congratulations, David's compatriots in nerdy feedback. Thank you all. That was really useful. This is a good segue to Google, actually. So this is Priest. We put out to a little bit of feedback, and I want to talk about our strategy for dealing with feedback with Dancer, Priest, and Google. Dancer, I put a half-assed version of Dancer in the Gatorform beta branch from Steam for a month. I can't remember. People generally got an idea of what it was, gave some initial feedback on it, caught a couple of bugs. It caused a couple of bugs, and bits of Dancer content leaked into the main game later. Priest, I was much more disciplined. Some of the Priest content is in the main game. People can find it with data mining. That's fine. Some of the Priest content was only available to a small number of people we gave upfront keys to. Because if you're selling additional content, it's very hard to put it in open beta for everyone and take it away again. We could have done it to everyone with perpetual edition, but that's complicated for reasons. So Priest, we did that, and honestly, I was very encouraged by the relatively limited amount of feedback we got. We caught, I I think 1.5 serious bugs and a bunch of minor issues, typos, and fields feedback. So I think I want to take this opportunity to do a bit of A/B testing, and Ghoul is, we are not, I think, going to play test even with the community before launch. We're going to keep it as a surprise, partly because we're now very close to launch. We work at quite tight timescales. Getting feedback in time after we've got the art is going to be tricky. But also, I'm interested in seeing how different the experience is when you put a bit more effort into QA internally. They're less relaxed about using the community for QA, because I've often been quite relaxed about that in the past. So Ghoul, you may see a few hints in the JSON with the Gate of Dawn update that went live today or earlier, but the main event won't appear until actual launch. So Ghoul. I mentioned earlier that Ghoul was less horrible than I expected. And honestly, in part, that's because I'm sick of writing this shit. You know, there are only so many maggots climbing up people's noses that you can write without having a bit of a moment when you spend the rest of your life bodding around a sunny flat looking after a 9-year-old and fighting off depression. So from quite early on, I was looking for ways to make the Ghoul more melancholy and less monstrous. And also, just I've done that before. I imagine a lot of people in the stream have played Sun and Sea, or have pursued or read about the Mystery Eaton plot line, and there's this atmosphere of wicked mischief around eating people. It is something I've done a lot of, and I don't want to keep going back to old creative ground. It's not completely absent from Ghoul, as I know some of you will be relieved to hear, but it's less wicked mischief than Mystery Eaton, and less overriding impulse. So here's the skinny with Ghoul. Again, if you don't want spoilers, go and make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, or drink something weird that you found in your liquor cupboard. Just checking the windows, it's quite sunny in here. Right. Ghouls start as mediums. Ghouls start as people who've made a living on the stage by imitating the voice of the dead. And this doesn't last, because in the Cultist Simulator setting, imitating the voice of the dead can attract the wrong kind of attention from the powers who have to do with Winter and the Dead. And quite quickly, you end up as a ghoul being tormented by the actual voices of the dead, and having an imaginary conversation with a painting. In fact, a number of imaginary conversations with a painting. The painting is a name with a capital N that you folks have seen elsewhere. She's quite benign for winter power, and the ghoul does have a desire. The desire which strikes the ghoul at the beginning of the end of their career as a medium is that they are aware of all that has been lost with the hours that's now gone from the world. So I thought about the dead, and I thought about what it meant to eat the dead, and I thought about what it might mean to eat the dead but not be a monster, or be arguably a monster, or why other people might choose it. And I was inspired inevitably by a fucking genius who'll be tremendously missed. Gene Wolfe, who wrote the Book of the New Sun and about 20 other books, famously, mostly in 2 hours in the morning, he'd get up, he'd work from like 6 till 8 on his novels, which are all dense, elusive, intelligent, poetic, powerful, enigmatic stuff. He'd go away, and work at his day job as the editor of an engineering magazine. I believe he was also involved in inventing a machine that made Pringles, or I haven't checked if that's true. Anyway, Gene Wolfe wrote about an animal called the Alzabo in Book of the New Sun. And the Alzabo is a possibly hyena-like creature, which whose glands can be used in a potion that allows for cannibalism, and particularly if you consume something with the juices of the Alzabo, then you gain some of its memories, even its personality. In a sense, they live on in you, which in a sense is what consumption is. If I eat a cow, then some of its vitamins, minerals, and calorific content lives on in me and continues life. But obviously, this is a much more specifically emotional or cognitive thing. So I want to acknowledge the explicit intellectual debt of the Elixir Zebuim in The Ghoul. It's very directly inspired by Gene Wolfe's Alzabo. He was a Roman Catholic. I'm an atheist, but God rest his soul. So as a ghoul, you are possessed by the urge to remember and celebrate great powers that have passed. So obviously you do this by eating people. To be specific, as a ghoul, early in the story, you end up acting on your desire and being given the formula for the Elixir Zebuim, which allows you to consume the dead. And of course, because this is cultist simulation, it's a story in the Gothic tradition, once you start eating the dead, you know, it's Moorish. You get one of these terrible hungers, and you need to keep nomming them. So you need to go and find graveyards, you need to dig up corpses, you need to eat the corpses, and obviously if you're poking around graveyards, sooner or later the authorities will notice. They'll be spoil sports about it. It's harder to get the graveyards, you have to find them. The loop of doing that is pretty simple at the moment, but I might add a few mechanics before launch, depending on how interrupted I get. So you have to eat people, and you have to satisfy your hunger. And this provides another drain on the economy. Thematically, it means you are a monster, but not in an uncomplicated way, because when you consume these corpses, you get their memories. There's a variety of memories you can get, and you can do at least 3 things with these memories. You can keep holding seances, because even though you've been driven off the stage because you're obviously out of your mind and you're hanging around talking to paintings and shouting the voices of the dead, for a certain kind of client, that's catnip. So some clients will still come and see you, and they'll want to hear about the menacing memories, unexpected memories, or joyful memories that you've dug out of the dead. A second thing you can do is discuss the memories, thank you very much, with painting I mentioned earlier. You may have things to say about them. Obviously you're imagining the things she's about them, she's a painting. And the final thing you can do with these memories is paint them into your own paintings. I've been wanting to expand and tweak the painting mechanics slightly. You may see a balance change in the paintings. I know a lot of people, hi Joel, have been asking about a balance change in the paintings for ages, so you may get a little bit more. But there's a few more options in paintings now, especially if you're a ghoul. And painting your memories into a canvas is the last leg of the ghoul legacy. There's a reference to a particular unusual, perhaps unique painting in one of the early texts that people have found of the game that draws the interest of a particular winter hour. And as a ghoul, you can consume not only bodies from graveyards, Jesus Christ, the things I say on the street, you can consume not only bodies from graveyards, But also, you can go on journeys all over Europe and dig up dead people and things out there as well, and stuff them in your gob with the Elixir Zibuim and get full up of eerie memories. So having gone to certain other unusual places in the game, most of which you've seen before, and dug up those memories, you can then paint those memories into the painting. You can create something unique, terrible, and very, very bleached, and you can use that to arrange a particular kind of ascension with a particular winter hour. So you are eating people, but it's because you really want to remember colours which have been lost from the world and celebrate them in your own ghoulish way. And that, I think, is all I had to say about. Oh no, there's one thing I want to say about Ghoul. So that's as I wrote it, increasingly came to be sort of appropriate for the last content I intend to write for a while for Cultist. The final ascension I'm doing for now, there might be more in the future, is winter, and obviously winter is the aspect of endings. And I like the idea that the last ascension people might be doing was the one that remembers things that have passed and celebrates them. So thank you for coming on that journey with me. And there is probably some stuff in there about some of the hours that have not made a specific appearance in the game today. But it's nice to end thematically with something that has to do with endings. I'm going to look at some more questions, and I'm going to talk about a couple more general design points. Are the voices? Good question. They are, but you're not. And the dead are not empty of content. If it turns out that QA doesn't have it, upset a lot of people. QA helps. The point is, I think I'll learn stuff about the kind of mistakes we catch versus the kind of mistakes we fix very quickly, the 24 hours after launch, and that's going to be useful in the future. Sometimes when the text between translation contains different information, should read into that. If you mean Chinese text contains different information, then probably not, because translating into Chinese has been very difficult. If you mean text that's translated out of Hebrew or VAC or Fuchin or whatever contains different information, then probably you should read something into that. Either kittens coming in and out. Fine. Thinking about adding more romance to the game with the winter design is really romance Julian Casey. Sorry, no. We might in the future have more romancers, but this is a good segue into the next bit, which is one of the fundamental problems with Cultist that's continued to be an issue. Which continue to be an issue with priests and especially Ghoul, which I'm thinking about quite carefully for that damned library game. And I'm going to try my best not to pre-announce the name of that damned library game on the stream. So please, if I do, pretend you haven't heard it. I'll do my fucking best. And that problem is this. I talked about this in my GDC talk this year. So those of you who've seen it will be familiar with it. And those of you who played the game will have seen this. I tend to make games which don't fit neatly in one genre. And that's good because you get to do unusual stuff and it's distinctive, and it means you're not competing directly against, commercially speaking, all the other existing games in the genre. So Cultist is kind of a narrative game. It's kind of a doodle god game. It's kind of a roguelike. I know a lot of people would object to that description, but fuck them. I love you. Don't fuck them. but it obviously has roguelike inspirations and elements. It's kind of a card game, all these sort of things. And the problem with borrowing from different genres and mashing them all together is that you often end up with features you didn't intend to import clashing against other features you didn't intend to import. Let me give you an example of that. Sunless Sea also borrowed from multiple genres. And as I've said before, one of the biggest design problems of Sunless Sea was that it is an RPG in some respects. It borrows stuff from that. It also borrows some stuff from roguelikes. So very strong survival elements. It's got a limited amount, very limited amount of randomization on future playthroughs. It has a strong expectation you'll die. So RPGs, you tend to play through once, and then twice or three times if you love them to see alternative endings. Roguelikes you play through dozens or hundreds of times because death is part of the experience. So obviously in Sunless Sea, I want characters to die repeatedly to give a sense of the threat and to give a sense of having sent generations into the ocean. But obviously an RPG has lots of explicit handcrafted content, and explicit handcrafted content gets much less interesting every time you play it. And I knew this was an issue, which is why I designed things like the legacy system in Sunless Sea. But it was more of an issue than I'd intended. It was the first honest-to-goodness PC video game I designed. So there's a real problem in Sunless Sea that you play through a bunch of stuff, you die, you have to play through the same bunch of stuff again. And that's very hard to fix by adding more content. Because even if you triple the amount of content in the early game, people still end up seeing all of it the same way. And that was because I took some RPG elements and I took some survivally roguelike elements and I welded them together. And I found that the expectation that you wouldn't see handcrafted content more than once, and the expectation that you would keep on dying and starting the game over, didn't play well together. So there's a similar problem with Cultist Simulator. And that problem is that on the one hand, it's a game of discovery and narrative. On the other hand, it's a game of resource management. From a player's point of view, that's a problem because you end up, I think there's less of a problem with seeing the same content over, because a lot of the content is deliberately written to be seen more than once. It's written in the expectation that you see it several times, like passing a favourite cafe on the road. But that is an issue. The bigger problem is that once you've worked out the interactions, once you've understood how restlessness and dread work, once you've understood how to keep yourself going in funds, once you've understood the concepts of messing with the suppression department with Mystique to confuse them while you're generating notoriety, all this sort of stuff, you still have quite a lot of game to get through. And you end up doing a certain amount of quite samey stuff to send through expeditions and grind for the lore you need to get through the final station. So that's the problem, right? It's either a game about discovery, in which case, once you've worked it out, you finish it, or it's a game about resources, in which case you want to be able to balance it so that once you've got the resource, you need to get through it. Or it's both, in which case that can be quite exciting because you're discovering stuff while in danger of running out of money or being eaten by your summonings. But it's also problematic. And from a designer's point of view, it's a problem because, let's say, to pick an example out of the air at random, you are writing a piece of DLC where you dig up bodies from graveyards, eat them, and then do something with their memories, like giving the memories to using the memories in a seance or putting them in a painting. And there's at least two effects you want to have as a designer with the choice of where to put those memories. One is the experimentation side of the game, the narrative side of the game. I fed a menacing memory to the painting, and it has this outcome, which tells me something about the world I didn't know, which gives me a sort of emotional frisson because of the writing, which is a moment of discovery. And another is the resource management aspect. I'm going to put this memory in the painting rather than in the rather than doing a seance, because I know the random drop I might get from here is more advantageous to my current strategic situation than the random drop I'm going to get from there. And designing for both those two at the same time is a ball ache, because different people have different expectations, and because it's very hard to design a game that is both interesting in terms of resource management decisions and interesting in terms of narrative every time. You can do it. You can do it in places of the game. I have done it, but it's a lot more work to do, especially with the tight timescales we work on. So that's one of the problems, and it's one of the things that's come up a lot for That Damned Library game, because the concept of TDLG from the start is that it is more a Heart player's game than a Winters player's game natively. And I'll talk about that terminology. I've used it before, but not everyone has necessarily been in those streams. We tend to talk about Heart players as the players who don't want the games to be mean to them. And it's in no way a slur, right? Some people enjoy playing Cultist as a game of occult solitaire where you work stuff out and you go as slowly as possible. I mean, Lee Lyra, actually, who I hired, is a Heart player because his strategy is to go super slow and super cautiously and get funds up to 200 before doing anything. And some people like riding the pain. The Winter players enjoy the sense that the game will punish them. They like permadeath. They want things to be difficult. And obviously the Heart players are the people who, all else being equal, the discovery will cater more for, and the Winter players are people who, all else being equal, the survivally roguelike stuff side of the game will cater more for. Obviously, very few people are either just Heart players or Winter players. I'm kind of a 70-30 Winter Heart player myself, I guess. And the library game is much, much heartier. I want a game that is much more about discovery, gentle survival mechanics, gentle resource management. So I've been thinking about how to make a game like that without losing the challenge, which keeps the Cultist fresh, as well as being frustrating for some people. And also, while not boring the Winter players, because I don't imagine, I don't want that side of our community to go away. So I want to make sure that I do something everyone will enjoy. I think the answer to it is this. I think there are going to be a lot of interactions and events and contexts in the library game which are gently satisfying to balance, which require some effort and thought to keep going, but which are more like the original context of trying to arrange things in an interesting way and solve modest challenges than the really difficult, oh my God, what kind of resource are we going to apply? What gives us a slightly better chance of surviving? You get in like hardcore board games where you allocate resources. So most of it's going to be fairly gentle. And one of the inspirations here was a talk I saw at GDC by the creative director, I forget, of Nonomy, who make Slime Rancher. Slime Rancher obviously is a fairly chilled game, although there's some threads and risk in there. And this talk was about a concept called home. And the gent pointed out that it's nice to have a place in your game where people can do something that's fairly straightforward and feel like they're getting something out of it, whether it's unlocking something cosmetic, or whether it's gradually increasing a resource, or whether it's seeing something grow that's satisfying. So that's what I want to aim for with the library game, is I want to provide the same sort of satisfaction that you might get from restoring a car, or building a collection, or fixing a complex problem. It's more like an ongoing management problem than you got to get to the mountain before frostbite kills you problem. So that's the general idea. But to keep the Winter players happy, and to keep honestly myself happy, because I don't think I can make a game that's never me, I want to provide a base level of things you can do that are going to be satisfying and find your way to a series of places where you feel like you've completed the game. You run through a bunch of the stories, and you've had an experience of the game. You can come away happy and start over and try some different options or go into something else. But I want people to be able to play it in a fairly chilled way. I also want the harder core players to be able to do the more difficult stuff. And to be clear, this isn't even Kickstarter pitch territory. This is me reading stuff off the whiteboard from memory territory. May change before Kickstarter, never mind launch. The most terrifying and powerful and dangerous objects in the universe, as you all know, the most alarming and powerful, the most compact and invincible things that human beings ever created. Definitely Coco. The source of everyone's hopes and dreams are books. Books are fucking great, but they contain knowledge which can save or destroy the world. So, as I think I've said, and I might have sounded like I was being frivolous, but I was quite serious, the library game, despite being a sort of, to use Lottie's phrase, spooky hygge, although Claire informs us that hygge is actually pronounced something like hygge, the Danish concept of coziness inside against ultimate darkness. The library game is supposed to be this sort of safe place where you've got your rain rattling on the roof, and you've got the fire burning in the corner, and you're huddled up there at the desk, cataloguing the book and stitching the spine back together. But at the same time, these books contain terrible perils, not in necessarily the sort of Pratchett sense of they'll actually come down and eat you, because Pratchett did that, and I'm not going to go up against the master. But in the sense that the information it contains is important and dangerous. And as you know, if you've dug into the lore of Cultist Simulator, history is written by the victors in a much more explicit and fundamental way, even in the real universe. So, as a librarian in a library patronized by the Hours, you are going to be making some potentially quite significant decisions about what version of history goes into the world. You're going to be picking cards off your desk and giving them to people who come into the library, whether those cards are books or whether things like reason or passion, to produce a particular outcome in a conversation, to say, let's take a rational approach, when somebody asks you how to deal with the problem, or let's brute force it. You're also, if the design works as I hope, going to be taking reason or passion, particular kinds of lore, or other cards you haven't seen yet in Cultist Simulator, and slotting them into books to say the interpretation you place on this is more something that would excite the Elegiast, or more something that would excite the Witch and Sister, and which determines the way the history is worked out. Or here's the missing page I'm going to add to the book. There's a couple of different versions of it. The version that's going to the library is a happy ending or a sad ending, a violent ending or an elegiac ending. And so this, I think, is where the winter side comes in. If given limited resources, given a limited number of books that are all very valuable, some of them unique, given a juggling challenge between the desires and preferences of the secret gods of the universe, if you can try to bend history to the outcome you want, that's really fucking hard. And failure isn't death. It's not just you ran out of food and you're gone. It's you pissed off the Hours by trying a radical interpretation of history, or trying to find a really weird ending to the point where you're fired, or cease to exist, or are taken apart into tiny pieces and distributed through all the oceans of the world. But the plan is that stuff is optional. You can curate the information that goes into the books. You can make decisions about your interpretations of them that will produce interesting effects. It's only if you really want to try to wrestle the serpent of history into submission, you're going to be putting yourself at risk, and you're going to be entering the more wintry, less hearty realm. And again, I want to make this really clear, because I know all my words will come back to haunt me. This is pre-production, work in progress, AK talking semi off the top of his head stuff. It might be that this doesn't make it into the game. I think it's probable that a game set in a library would involve books, but beyond that, this is just us folks talking. And it's 4:54, so I see that my ancient high school teacher instincts have kicked in again, and I've managed to talk for almost the right amount of time. And I'm going to scroll back. I can see Lottie has been saying things in the stream as well, and try to address some stuff people have asked. Everyone loves Neville. The title screen art for the game is so good. Lottie's not a beanie. I'll challenge you to a duel. French translation of the game. Localization depends on how well our Chinese Russian lock does. You just walked in once a book. Let me talk about that briefly. Hours don't walk into libraries. I've been coy about about the degree to which hours ever manifest in the physical world directly. Names manifest in the physical world. If you play Culture Simulator, you've met a couple. And I've also been coy, because in-game it is non-specific, about the degree to which names are entities that have entered the service of the hours, and to what extent they are avatars or manifestations or emanations or facets of the hours. So if, for example, Miss Nania walks in, because she might physically exist in the world, then in some sense, perhaps the Egest is visiting directly. I think it's safe to say, though, that you shouldn't lend books to King Crucible. It is kind of secret history essentially that we're talking about in the ways. Please take my all my money and make this. Thank you. We hope to. Well, I was Crucible, I'm afraid, to take a person. Oh, your connection's unstable. Please wait while you try to reconnect you. I don't know if you can hear anything I'm saying. Okay, probably break up there. I'll say again. Winter and Nock Ascensions, it makes sense for you not to be able to take your beloved with you. I'm glad of this, because it's a pain in the arse to write that stuff every time. But if it's winter, winter is the loneliest ascension. I've talked a bit before about Winterlong and what they're actually like, and taking a beloved with you would be kind of mean, even if they're already dead. Nock, for reasons you'll see when you complete it, it's not really suitable to take a risen with you. So the Moth and Heart endings in the Dancing DLC make you log at the end. Yes, for certain values of yes. And this is something that I've come up with before. I've come up against before. Answers about metaphysics in the Culture Simulator universe and the histories are much more like answers about politics or history or law than they are answers about physics. So you could say, for example, was George W. Bush the President of the United States of America? And the history books would say yes, and most people would say yes, and a hardcore of annoyed people would say no, because the election's rightfully Al Gore's, and it was handed to George Bush by a judicial decision which wasn't appropriate. So I'm not taking a position on what's right there. The point is that it's something you can debate. You could, for example, describe the Indian Mutiny, which I was taught about in school, when a number of indigenous Indians, including some people in the British colonial army, the sepoys, mounted a rebellion against India, against British rule. You could call that the Indian Mutiny, and that's how I learned to call it. Or, as a Hindu girlfriend of mine pointed out to me, where she comes from, it's called the First War of Independence. And it's both those things. And you might consider one of those interpretations more appropriate, but both those interpretations are made. Is Theresa Gaumier, spoilers, a name or a long? It depends who you talk to. People can make the case for being a name, and I think those people are probably quite optimistic, but they're not idiots. And people who call her a long would certainly come to no major controversy, but it might be underrating her a little bit. So at the end, in the Dancer DLC, are you a long? Well, long are people that are more than mortal, who live forever. But forever, as I've said elsewhere, is a lot shorter than it sounds. And all you can ever say about forever is it's not over yet. So if you live for a very long time and become something more than human, then most people would say you're a long. So people might get purist about it. Does the water provider scream it? Is it audible? Well, I can't hear it. I think that's what I got. Lottie, is there anything on the foreground? Oh yes, this is the thing I'm really bad at. Is we are actually a commercial company that are making products. You should buy our products. Have we've announced everything, right? You're the come to say it. You're better at it.
Hey, YouTube people. So, on French, we are releasing, in case you have missed it, 2 bits of DLC. We've got The Priest and The Ghoul, as you know from the title of this talk, and we're also releasing a whole anthology edition. So anybody who hasn't got the full Cultist Simulator package, that's coming out as well. And we have a couple of surprises that may or may not be announcing on the 30th. So basically, be there or be losers.
So are we releasing that anthology again?
I don't know what you mean.
No.
We'll just have to wait and see.
Anthology edition, yes, it's all 3 DLC at a price, because lots of people have asked us for the beginning.
The soundtrack.
And the soundtrack, I've forgotten that.
What a great deal.
Fucking hell, the soundtrack's good. Oh my God. I was listening to the early mixes of the Thunderskin today for reasons, and Maribeth is just a goddamn genius. Card
Canadian sylph.
Yes. It's worth saying, because I know some people ask, if you've already bought the Dancer, can you buy the anthology edition and get the price of the Dancer back? And the answer is no, because reasons to do with the way Steam operates, and for God's sake, folks,
and royalties,
it's £2.50.
But if you have, just to clear up any questions you might have, if you are a perpetual edition owner, of course you get the Ghoul and the Priest for free. So that will just magically appear on the 30th in your library. But if you want to help us out by sharing stuff and talking about it and joining in the Discord, which I'm sure will be full of people going, oh my God, the lore, because I've been playing it, and seriously, there is a lot of lore. Yeah,
I've been quiet about that, honestly, this time
so
around. But I think if you care at all about Cultist lore, there are going to be a couple of things which will probably cause you to want to change your underwear beforehand. And I mean, I don't judge. Maybe you don't change your underwear. I honestly change my underwear less frequently than I probably should.
So this started out as a reminder that people should buy our stuff, and now we're just talking about your pants. So with that, I think we should end.
Well, you missed the whole thing where I talked about the experience of being submerged in sewer water and human turds floating past your island.
Seriously? I would like to publicly apologise on behalf of this man and forget he said anything gross.
Anyway, that's all, folks. The next time I see you, I hope we'll have announced the name of a project I'm really excited about, and I'll be able to talk about it in more detail. Thank you all very much.